The anthem of Castro's Cuba once called the people to battle in the fight for independence from Spain. Today, the battle in Cuba is for basic survival. Some of Havana's proud people are begging in the streets.
The poverty, it's really unbelievable.
Foreign guests enjoy the world's most beautiful beaches. Can tourism save the Cuban people from economic disaster? Can foreign investment turn the Cuban economy around? Will Cuba remain a country for the Cubans?
Yes, the embargo is strangling the people of Cuba, but it may promote more rapid change.
I'm Rich Newberg. Explore with us a small country's giant advances in medicine as a medical team from Buffalo is invited into operating rooms like you've never seen before and feel the pain of doctors struggling to meet patients' needs because supply shelves are empty.
You hope that the future will bring them more than what they're living in right now, and I hope that maybe, we can help them also.
But is time running out? Havana, more than 3 decades after the revolution. An island nation 90 miles off the coast of Florida, a nation on the verge of economic collapse. There's little gasoline for the cars. Find a ride where you can. It is pedal power that now moves people around. But it's the shortage of food that hurts people the most here. The shelves of food ration stores are empty, and families are forced to carefully plan their meals based on what the government gives them and what they can buy on the black market.
We are living a very hard time because there's a lot of shortage of many things. It's not enough at all. It's just to survive, just to waiting for better times.
35 years ago, a young revolutionary by the name of Fidel Castro led a revolution that overthrew a corrupt dictator known as Batista.
This is only the beginning. The last battle will be fought in the capital. You can be sure.
An uprising that became a revolution. But the U.S. would soon regard Castro as an enemy when he made his ill-fated communist alliance with the Soviet Union. CBS's Walter Cronkite reported on this May Day parade in Havana in 1961.
In these weeks, the flirtation with Moscow has become a honeymoon. Castro, who acted at first in the name of Cuban nationalism, who resisted being labeled with any foreign doctrine, has now openly declared his country a socialist state.
A U.S.-backed invasion of Cuba led by Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs proved to be a fiasco. A Soviet missile buildup in Cuba put the world on the verge of nuclear war.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
A risky U.S. blockade of Cuba forced the Soviets in Cuba to back down and remove the missiles. But since then, Cuba has been off limits for U.S. trade and travel. Here in Havana, everyone is painfully aware of the U.S. trade embargo. And now that the Soviet Union no longer exists, they realize they are virtually alone in the world. They are alone, but would very much like to reestablish ties with the U.S. They say they have nothing against our people, but are still uncertain about our government.
People, America, is good for Cuba. People, America, good, people, America.
President Clinton.
Clinton.
No lo conocemos todavía.
No, todavía no. Maybe sí, maybe sí, maybe no.
Whether Castro will eventually have a meeting of the minds with Clinton is still uncertain. Tonight, we will take you inside Cuba and journey out into the streets of Havana with a Buffalo delegation that was shocked by conditions as they exist today. And we'll follow 2 Buffalo doctors into Cuban hospitals where critical shortages of medicine and supplies are now an everyday problem. U.S. policy toward Cuba has always centered on this neighborhood in Miami, Little Havana, and the plight of the exiles. They fled their homeland when Castro declared his dedication to socialist ideals. Cuban exiles have settled in cities throughout the country, including Buffalo. Dr. Olga Mendel was just a young woman when her family fled in 1960.
I think I love freedom, and I could see it slipping away. Although I was very young, I could see it slipping away. And I would have very soon gotten into very deep trouble.
Even as veterans from the Bay of Pigs invasion train a new generation of soldiers to fight for liberation, many exiles are hoping the economic stranglehold on Cuba will lead to the fall of Castro and a new era of freedom and democracy for the island nation. Other Americans are looking directly at the urgent needs of the Cuban people. Doctors Atwall and Mileman didn't have to look very far to see for themselves. Despite all the advances of Cuban medicine, the crisis on the streets of Havana has also become the crisis of the hospitals. From all over Cuba, those young and old suffering from serious eye disorders come to the eye hospital in Havana for specialized care. A few street vendors sell trinkets for the little ones and plastic flowers to cheer up the patients. No fancy hospital gift shops in this country where people are hurting for the basics. As Dr. Amar Atwall of Buffalo and his medical team would learn firsthand, Cuba prides itself on its accomplishments in health care, leading the world in the treatment of myopia or nearsightedness, for example.
Looking at the incisions, very excellent surgical technique, I would say.
But there are some disturbing signs that all is not well these days inside Cuban hospitals. Hallways were often poorly lit. Light bulbs are in short supply. More importantly, medicine shelves were almost empty in some storage areas. Antibiotics and anti-inflammatory drugs difficult to obtain. A result, said the Cubans, of the U.S. policy of no trade with Cuba.
In general, we have serious problems with the medicine. Not only the ophthalmology, I believe that the embargo is one of the principal reasons.
They are short of some medications all the time, and I think that's the area where they need help.
Cuban doctors did get some help from Dr. Atwall in one area. He shared with them his technique of removing cataracts without stitches. He was among the first in the United States to use this method on an ongoing basis. They watched as Dr. Atwall used an ultrasound and suction device to break up the cataract and remove it from the eye.
It's okay.
But Dr. Atwall is also learning something new. At one point, the Cuban doctors used a special drug on the eye of a patient, a drug that Dr. Atwall had never heard of before.
Absolutely.
You can see the pupil.
Yeah, big, beautiful. Okay. They use, which we never use in the U.S., medicine to dilate the pupil within the eye. This is something new for us.
Dr. Atwall's assistants from Buffalo were amazed at how quickly their Cuban counterparts were able to adjust to a new technique.
They picked up quickly on our equipment, our instrumentation. They were able to assist my technician efficiently. It went very well.
The Cuban doctors agreed after giving Dr. Atwall some of their most difficult cases.
Porque ha sido un caso verdaderamente complicado.
Because it has been a case really complicated.
Y el resultado final ha sido excelente.
And the final result has been excellent.
The Cuban patients seemed to feel the same way. The very next day, their vision in the affected eye had improved.
Any pain? ¿Dolor tiene?
No.
No, no pain.
But the real eye-opener came when the Cubans let us see what could only be described as assembly line medicine. Eye patients literally lined up on a conveyor belt that moved them through a team of 6 surgeons who each performed his own function. Individual trays with surgical instruments moved with each patient.
It's very fascinating. I've heard about it, but never seen in person, and it's amazing. I don't know whether they achieve that much efficiency, but by doing one step of a procedure, I think they become master at it. From the county of Erie, city of Buffalo.
In many ways, this was a symbolic exchange, and Dr. Atwall presented the hospital's director with an Erie County official plate as a token gift.
And hopefully we'll continue to work together in the future.
Hands reaching out over a once uncrossable gap. One gap getting wider and wider in Cuba separates tourists from the Cuban population. The average Cuban can't afford the island's most beautiful beaches and resorts in exclusive Veradero, and they are also off limits these days. Paradise, it seems, is reserved for those with hard currency, not the peso.
They'd rather have an empty room than give it to the Cuban, and that's what tour operators always said. They don't like Cubans there because it's a fact that Cubans, well, they get there, and if they put a soap, they take it. If they have toilet paper, they take it because they don't have toilet paper.
Could Cuba be heading back to the era of the 50s, when American dollars and tourism kept the Cuban economy moving? And what has happened to Castro's communist dream of equality as the door to foreigners is opened wider? Some observations from some foreigners from Western New York who got a first-hand view when we come back. For its foreign guests, there are no shortages of gourmet dishes and lush tropical settings. The Hotel Nacional is a world unto itself. Outside of the hotel, it's a whole other world. Forget meat on the table here. This is a world where people are hungry for the essentials of life. And nowhere are the needs more apparent than in the worst ghettos of Havana.
The children, you just want to love and hug them all, and you'd like to give them everything you have. Okay.
It is difficult to refuse hungry people with outstretched hands. But once you give to one, you are hard-pressed not to dig even deeper. But the demand is overwhelming. Helen Scott found out the hard way, only a short distance from the Hotel Nacional.
Children begging, reaching out for you for a piece of gum, food, dollar. You wish you could help them all.
We would say that it's a humble way of living here.
Our guide, Arturo, took us through central Havana, a crowded, rundown part of the city where blackouts to save power compound the problems of life.
So they make the blackout here for 3 hours, more or less, and then in another municipality they cut for 3 hours too.
Cubans must rely on their ingenuity to maintain any sort of normal existence. The same man who hooked up this old bus battery and converter for power in his house built this homemade antenna capable of picking up CNN and other foreign programs from frequencies beamed into tourist hotels.
I have had only a sketchy briefing about this.
There are similar antennas in about 2% of Havana's homes and apartment buildings. People have a hunger for news that is uncensored by their government.
Yes, it is interesting because I can see more news, more point of views.
Cuban television is about to broadcast a very special sporting event involving young athletes from around the world, an event that took place in the city the Cubans call Buffalo.
One world together.
We remember a superior Cuban baseball team that took home the gold. What Castro probably prefers to forget is the defector on the team who said he had had enough of life on his island homeland.
Every night I was thinking about that, and I just decided, because of the situation of Cuba, it's impossible to live there.
While some are escaping to the outside world and others are trying to learn all they can about it, still others have succeeded in bringing in certain cosmetic values that appear to be a far cry from the communist ideal. A fashion show in communist Cuba. This flaunting of skin-deep beauty and the material that covers the skin of these fashion models. But then again, this was for the benefit of tourists in Havana. Cuba is a country where the people on the street are more concerned about putting food on the table than how they look in the mirror, or so it would seem. At Cuba's #1 hospital for specialized surgery, there is a huge demand for such cosmetic work as breast reductions, lipo or fat suctioning, and facelifts. Buffalo plastic surgeon Dr. Jeffrey Mileman, who shared techniques with his Cuban counterparts, was surprised to learn that 60 to 75% of the operations in this department of surgery were cosmetic in nature.
We thought, as you know, that it would be mostly reconstructive. But here, they're able to do cosmetic surgery just by request, which is very interesting.
The waiting period is 4 to 6 months. The operation is free. Any patient admitted to this or any other Cuban hospital is automatically tested for AIDS, and it's a good thing, because in this land of great need, medical procedures are not what they are in the United States. Soap is in such short supply that one bar is passed down the line for scrubbing before an operation. The same bar will be used again and again. While this seemed highly unusual by U.S. medical standards, the most incredible discovery was made by Dr. Meilman in the operating room. Almost all the material used during surgery, except for the adhesive tape, is recycled.
Now, this pair of gloves that I used was what we use an exam glove at home. You use it, examine, and you throw it out.
And they're going to use this again?
They're going to use this again.
Wash the blood?
They're going to wash the blood, yes. And the final drain that they're using to drain the blood, that has been used on another patient before, and that's re-washed and reused.
So even in this hardline communist country, squeezed by shortages of basic essentials, some people are trying to keep pace with the material world outside, where beauty can be skin deep. Is Fidel Castro losing his grip on his country, or is he just loosening it, realizing Cuba cannot remain isolated from the rest of the world? The puzzling question of Castro, when we come back. A moment of chaos hits old Havana. A thief has just snatched a bag from a tourist. Police respond by firing shots. It's a disturbing image in a country where underlying frustrations mark the so-called special period of sacrifice. But at a time when Castro may be most vulnerable, a time when oxen are replacing tractors because there are no spare parts available and little fuel, many Cubans still believe Castro is the only leader who can stabilize the country. Some families are still fighting the revolution, fearful of foreign intervention and losing what they have gained under Castro, such as wiping out illiteracy and improving health care for the masses.
Ahora, el que nos trata de agredir, sí le vamos arriba.
But those who try to invade us, we are going to beat them because we have to defend these achievements.
But the social fabric in Havana may be unraveling as people do what they have to do to put food on the table. Prostitutes line one of the city's main thoroughfares at night.
There's a lot of prostitution going in Cuba because they are the only ones who have dollars. The Cuban peso doesn't run anymore in that country. You know, you have your ration card, but there's nothing in the stores to buy with your ration card.
If you want quality goods, you have to shop in the so-called dollar stores, where only U.S. dollars are accepted. In order to obtain dollars, Cubans will typically sell black market cigars to tourists for prices that are a fraction of what they would sell for in other countries.
25 cigar, 25 cigar.
For $10.
25. 20.
I know, there's 25 to a box.
Yeah.
How much for the box?
Those who wanted to practice their religion had to pay a price in communist Cuba in the past, but not anymore. Castro has eased restrictions. Cuba's small Jewish community had its first rabbi on the holy day of Yom Kippur since the revolution. Cuba's young people are beginning to search for answers that they can't find in communist dogma.
People in general in Cuba are trying to find a new way for their life, a new route, a new answer to the troubles.
Castro may be hoping his more liberal policies will help persuade the Clinton administration to lift the embargo. But so far, President Clinton has given no indication he is inclined to do that.
I have no change in Cuba policy except to say that I supported the Cuban Democracy Act, and I hope someday that we'll all be able to travel to a democratic Cuba.
Tonight we have taken you inside Cuba to show you how the problems of this island nation are inexorably linked to international politics, but what can happen when people put politics aside and focus on human need alone. To some large degree, the United States will determine the future of the Cuban people when it decides the ultimate question of lifting the embargo. But for now, there are no signs that will happen until the end of communism's last stand in Cuba. For News 4, I'm Rich Newberg. Good night.
Gózame el ritmo, ¿eh?